My daughter uninvited me to her wedding for being too poor. I sat on a bench holding my only sandwich. When I saw a beggar digging through the trash with his dog, I gave them my entire dinner. 2 hours later, 15 black BMWs blocked the venue. The man stepped out and simply said something that, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The phone rang at 7:15 in the morning, cutting through the peaceful silence of my small kitchen. I was standing at the counter, spreading peanut butter on day-old bread for what would be my only meal until dinner. The caller ID showed Cora's name, and my heart immediately lifted. My daughter rarely called anymore, especially not this early. "Cora, sweetheart," I answered, unable to hide the joy in my voice. "How are you feeling? Only 3 days until the big day." The silence that followed lasted long enough to make me check if the call had dropped. When Cora finally spoke, her voice was different. Cold, distant. Nothing like the excited bride-to-be I'd expected. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Saturday." I set down my knife, giving her my full attention. "Of course. What about it? Do you need help with anything? I know I can't afford much, but that's exactly what I'm calling about." Her words came fast, like she'd rehearsed them. "Mom, I've been thinking, and Bradley's family. They're very particular about appearances. The Whitmores have a certain image to maintain." My stomach began to twist. "I don't understand. What does that have to do with— You can't come to the wedding." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knees suddenly weak. "What did you say?" "I'm uninviting you, Mom. I'm sorry, but you don't fit in with what we're trying to create. Your clothes, your background, the way you talk about money all the time because you don't have any. It would be embarrassing." I couldn't breathe. 26 years of raising this girl alone, working 3 jobs to keep food on our table, wearing the same 4 dresses for years so she could have new school clothes. 26 years, and this was what I got in return. "Cora, please, I'm your mother. I raised you by myself after your father died. I gave you everything I had. And I'm grateful for that, I really am. But Mom, this is my chance to finally have a real family. The Whitmores are successful people. They vacation in the Hamptons and attend charity galas. They don't need to count every dollar like we always did. I can't have you there reminding everyone of where I came from." Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper. "Where you came from. You came from love, Cora. You came from a mother who worked herself to the bone to give you opportunities. I know, and like I said, I'm grateful. But this is bigger than us now. This is about my future with Bradley and his family. They've already expressed concerns about my background, and having you there would just make things worse." I thought about the new dress hanging in my closet. $300 I'd saved over 8 months, eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day. It was the first new dress I'd bought myself in 5 years, and I'd chosen it specifically for her wedding. Navy blue with small white flowers, simple but elegant. I'd imagined dancing with her, watching her face light up when she saw me looking my best for her special day. "What about your father's memory?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "He should be represented there. I'm the only connection you have to him." "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is. I've made my decision. You can watch the ceremony online if you want. Bradley's cousin is live streaming it." Live streaming. She wanted me to watch my only child's wedding through a computer screen like a stranger, like I meant nothing to her at all. "I helped pay for this wedding," I said, my voice stronger now, anger mixing with the pain. "That $2,000 I gave you last month was my entire savings account, money I'd been putting away for emergencies. And I told you not to do that. I never asked you to empty your savings. You did that on your own, and then you held it over my head like you always do. Everything with you is about money, Mom. How much you spent? How much you sacrificed? It's exhausting." My hands were shaking now. It's not about the money, Cora. It's about love. Everything I did, every sacrifice I made, was because I love you more than my own life. I know you love me in your way, but your way isn't healthy, Mom. The guilt trips, the constant reminders of what you've given up for me. Bradley's parents don't do that. They just give freely without expecting gratitude or making you feel like you owe them something. I never wanted you to owe me anything. I wanted you to understand that love sometimes requires sacrifice, that families support each other through hard times. Well, I don't want that kind of family anymore. I want the kind where people are successful and stable and don't have to worry about keeping the lights on. I want to be a Whitmore now. The finality in her voice told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't even really a phone call. It was a dismissal. So that's it then? 26 years, and I'm just dismissed? It doesn't have to be forever, Mom. Once Bradley and I are settled, maybe things can be different. But right now, I need you to respect my decision and stay away from the wedding. I closed my eyes, picturing her as a little girl, how she used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared her, how she'd beg me to read just one more bedtime story, how proud she looked when she graduated high school, running to hug me first, telling me she couldn't have done it without me. That little girl was gone. In her place was a woman who saw me as an embarrassment, a burden, a reminder of a life she wanted to forget. Will you at least tell me about it afterward? Will you call and tell me how beautiful you looked? How the ceremony went? Another long pause. I think it's best if we don't talk for a while, Mom. I need space to start my new life. The line went dead. I stood in my empty kitchen, still holding the phone, still wearing the same worn bathrobe I'd had for 10 years. The peanut butter sandwich sat forgotten on the counter, and suddenly, I wasn't hungry anymore. I wasn't anything anymore. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet, staring at that navy dress. $300. 8 months of skipped lunches. All for a wedding I wasn't welcome at, for a daughter who no longer wanted me in her life. But even as the tears came, even as my heart broke into pieces, I knew something with absolute certainty. I had been a good mother. I had loved her with everything I had. If that wasn't enough for her, if that embarrassed her, then the problem wasn't with me. I was going to that wedding, not to cause a scene, not to embarrass her, just to see my little girl get married from a distance, just to be there, even if she didn't want me to be. Because that's what mothers do. We love our children even when they break our hearts. 3 days later, I found myself sitting on a weathered wooden bench across from the most beautiful building I'd ever seen. The Whitmore Estate's main hall rose before me like something from a fairy tale, all white marble columns and cascading flower arrangements. Even from this distance, I could hear the soft melody of a string quartet warming up, the gentle murmur of arriving guests, the clink of expensive glasses being arranged. I'd put on the navy dress after all. It fit perfectly, and despite everything, it made me feel dignified. I'd done my hair in a simple bun and worn my mother's pearl necklace, costume jewelry she'd bought at Woolworth's 40 years ago, but it still caught the light beautifully. If someone glanced my way from across the street, they might think I belonged here. But I didn't belong here. Cora had made that abundantly clear. I unwrapped my peanut butter sandwich, the same lunch I'd been eating for months to save money for her wedding gift. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I sat, eating the meal of someone who couldn't afford anything else, while watching my daughter marry into a family that probably spent more on flower arrangements than I made in a year. The bench was positioned under an old oak tree that provided perfect shade and an unobstructed view of the estate's main entrance. I could see the elegant guests arriving in their luxury cars, women in designer dresses that probably cost more than my annual rent, men in tailored suits that fit like they were born wearing them. Everyone looked polished, confident, like they'd never questioned whether they belonged somewhere. I took a small bite of my sandwich, chewing slowly to make it last. It would be my only food until I got home tonight. But watching from here, Seeing Cora's wedding from afar, somehow it felt worth it. That's when I noticed him. An elderly man was crouched beside a garbage bin near the corner of the street, his weathered hands carefully sorting through the contents. A small dog, some kind of terrier mix with graying fur around his muzzle, sat patiently beside him, his tail wagging hopefully. The man was dressed in layers despite the warm afternoon, a faded brown coat over what looked like several shirts, pants that had seen better decades, and boots that were held together more by determination than leather. But something about him caught my attention. His movements were careful, methodical. He wasn't frantically digging like someone desperately hungry. He was searching with the patience of someone who had learned to find dignity even in desperate circumstances. The dog looked up at his companion with such pure loyalty and love that it made my chest ache. Here was devotion that asked for nothing in return except companionship. The kind of love I thought I'd shared with Cora before she decided I was an embarrassment. The man found something, a partially eaten apple, and examined it carefully before offering it to his dog first. The animal sniffed politely but didn't take it, as if he understood that his friend needed it more. The gesture of offering it first, though, that spoke of a man who still remembered kindness even when he had nothing left to give. I looked down at my sandwich, peanut butter on day-old bread. Simple but filling, probably more substantial than anything that man had eaten today. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stood up and walked toward them. "Excuse me," I called out softly, not wanting to startle either of them. The man looked up, and I was struck by his eyes. They were a warm brown, clear and intelligent, set in a face that showed the wear of too many hard nights, but also held a dignity that circumstances couldn't erase. His silver hair was clean but shaggy, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite his obvious situation. "Ma'am?" he said, straightening up with surprising grace. His voice was cultured, educated, not what I'd expected. "I was wondering if you and your friend might be hungry," I said, holding out my sandwich. "I have more than I need." He stared at the offering, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe even suspicion. People probably didn't often approach him with kindness. "That's very generous of you," he said carefully, "but I couldn't take your lunch." "Please," I insisted. "I insist. It's just peanut butter, nothing fancy, but it's fresh." The dog had perked up at the mention of food, his tail wagging more enthusiastically. The man looked down at his companion, and I could see the moment his resolve softened. "Well," he said, "if you're certain. Charlie here hasn't had a proper meal in a couple of days." "Charlie's a handsome fellow," I said, watching as the man carefully tore the sandwich in half, offering the larger piece to his dog first. Charlie accepted it gently, his tail never stopping its grateful motion. "He's been with me for 3 years now," the man said, taking a small bite of his portion. "Found him as a puppy, abandoned behind a restaurant. Funny how the ones who have the least are sometimes the most loyal." Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. "You speak like someone who's seen both sides of life." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I suppose I have. Life has a way of teaching lessons you never expected to learn. What about you? What brings you to sit on a park bench dressed for a wedding?" The question caught me off guard. I gestured toward the estate across the street. "My daughter's getting married today. Over there." His eyes followed my gesture, taking in the obvious luxury and grandeur of the celebration. "And you're here instead of there because—" The kindness in his voice, the genuine interest, broke something open inside me. "Because she uninvited me. Said I would embarrass her in front of her new family." "Ah." He nodded slowly, like he understood something important. "And yet here you are, close enough to share in her joy from afar, but far enough away to honor her wishes. That takes a special kind of love." I felt tears threatening again. I raised her by myself after her father died, 26 years of putting her first, and this is what I get. She's ashamed of where she came from. Children sometimes mistake the packaging for the contents, he said quietly. They see poverty and think it means failure. They don't see the love, the sacrifice, the strength it takes to raise a child with nothing but determination and heart. His words were like a balm to my wounded soul. Here was a stranger who understood what my own daughter couldn't see. "What about you?" I asked. "Do you have family?" His expression grew distant. "I had a daughter once. Lost her to my own mistakes, my own pride. By the time I learned what really mattered, it was too late to fix things between us." "I'm sorry." "So am I. But it taught me something valuable about the nature of love and family. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us fail us, and sometimes complete strangers show us more kindness than we've ever known." He finished the last bite of sandwich and looked at me with those remarkably clear eyes. "Thank you for this. For seeing us as human beings worth feeding. You have no idea how rare that kind of compassion is." "Everyone deserves kindness," I said simply. "Yes," he agreed. "They do. But not everyone is brave enough to act on that belief. You are, though. You're braver than you know." Charlie had finished his portion and was now sitting politely, looking back and forth between us as if following our conversation. The man reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "We should let you get back to your vigil," he said. "But thank you again. This meant more than you can imagine." "Take care of yourselves," I said. "Both of you." As I walked back to my bench, I felt lighter somehow. Sharing that simple meal had filled something empty inside me that I hadn't even realized was there. Maybe it was knowing that I could still help someone, still matter to someone, even if that someone was a stranger. I settled back onto the bench and watched as more guests arrived at the estate. The ceremony would start soon. My daughter would walk down that aisle, and I would watch her become a wife from this distance, holding on to the memory of her childhood when she still thought I was the most important person in her world. But something had changed during my brief encounter with the man and his dog. I no longer felt quite so alone, quite so worthless. I had shown kindness when I could have wallowed in my own pain. I had chosen to give when I had little to spare. Maybe that said something about who I really was. Maybe that was worth something, even if my daughter couldn't see it. 2 hours had passed since my encounter with the homeless man and his dog. The wedding ceremony had begun, and I could hear the distant sound of music drifting across the street from the Whitmore estate. A Bach piece, I thought. Something elegant and timeless that spoke of old money and refined taste. Everything Cora had always dreamed of. I remained on my bench, watching the last few stragglers hurry through the ornate gates. Women clutching small beaded purses, men adjusting their cufflinks, everyone moving with the confidence of people who belonged exactly where they were going. I wondered if Cora was nervous, if she was thinking about me at all, or if she was so caught up in finally achieving her dream that she'd forgotten I existed. The afternoon sun was beginning to shift, casting longer shadows across the manicured grounds. I was considering whether to stay for the reception or head home when I heard the sound of engines approaching. Not just 1 or 2 cars, but what sounded like a convoy. I turned to see a procession of black BMW sedans turning onto the street, 15 of them, each one gleaming like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. They moved in perfect formation, their windows tinted so dark I couldn't see who was inside. The lead car pulled up directly in front of the estate's main entrance, while the others arranged themselves along the street with military precision. The entire wedding party on the estate grounds stopped what they were doing. Guests who had been mingling on the terrace turned to stare. Even the string quartet seemed to falter for a moment before resuming their performance with less certainty. My heart began to race. This wasn't part of the planned festivities. This was something else entirely. The driver of the lead BMW stepped out first, a tall man in a black suit who moved with the bearing of professional security. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the rear door with practiced efficiency. The man who emerged took my breath away. Gone were the layers of worn clothing, the weathered boots, the unkempt appearance. In their place stood someone I barely recognized, the same man I had shared my sandwich with but transformed. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in several months. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his beard trimmed to precise lines. But it was his bearing that struck me most, the way he carried himself with quiet authority, like someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. Charlie emerged from the car beside him, but even the dog looked different. His fur had been brushed to a glossy shine, and he wore a leather collar that looked like it was made by the same craftsman who created designer handbags. Yet his tail wagged with the same enthusiasm when his eyes found mine across the street. I sat frozen on my bench, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be the same man who had been searching through garbage just hours ago. But those eyes, those warm, intelligent brown eyes, were unmistakable. He stood for a moment beside his car, surveying the estate grounds with the calculating gaze of someone taking inventory. Then his eyes found mine, and he smiled. Not the grateful, humble smile of someone accepting charity, but something far more complex, something that held secrets and power and a depth I was only beginning to understand. He said something to his driver, who nodded and returned to the car. Then he began walking toward me, crossing the street with measured steps, while Charlie trotted happily beside him. The 15 cars remained where they were, their drivers standing at attention like an honor guard. As he approached my bench, I could see details I had missed before. His shoes were handmade Italian leather. His watch was the kind I had only seen in magazine advertisements. Even his posture spoke of wealth and authority. Not the careful dignity of someone with nothing, but the relaxed confidence of someone who had never doubted their place in the world. "Hello again," he said, settling onto the bench beside me as if we were old friends meeting for afternoon tea. I stared at him, my mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Who are you?" He smiled, and I caught a glimpse of the warmth I had seen in the homeless man, but now it was framed by something much more powerful. "William Ashford," he said simply, "and I owe you a debt of gratitude." The name hit me like a physical blow. William Ashford. I knew that name. Everyone knew that name. He owned half the commercial real estate in 3 states. His face had been on the cover of Forbes magazine just last month. His net worth was measured in billions, not millions. But you were," I stammered. "Homeless?" "Yes, in a manner of speaking. It's something I do periodically. A way of testing the true nature of humanity when people think I have nothing to offer them." His eyes grew serious. "Most people fail that test, Eunice." The fact that he knew my name sent another shock through me. "How do you—" "After you left, I made some inquiries. It's not difficult when you have the right resources." He gestured toward the estate across the street. I wanted to understand the full story before I acted. "Acted? What do you mean, acted?" William leaned back against the bench, his gaze moving to the wedding celebration. "I've been testing people for 15 years now, Eunice. Wearing different disguises, putting myself in situations where I appear to need help. Do you know how many people have offered to share their meal with a stranger? In 15 years of trying?" I shook my head. 7. You're the 7th. And you're the first who clearly had so little to spare that sharing meant going without yourself. His voice softened. "You gave away your only food to feed a homeless man and his dog. You saw dignity where others saw failure. You chose compassion over self-preservation." Tears were starting to blur my vision. "It was just a sandwich." "No," he said firmly. "It was everything. It was proof that goodness still exists."